The strongest prison is the one that believes no one inside can still think. The prison did not orbit a sun. It orbited certainty. Suspended above the frozen world of Nerith, the colossal alien detention station hung like a ring of polished steel against endless darkness. Thousands of white lights traced its outer structure, while silent transport craft drifted through magnetic docking lanes with mechanical precision. Inside, every corridor echoed with the measured rhythm of gravity locks sealing and unlocking, each metallic click reminding every prisoner that escape had long ago become a forgotten word. Cell Block 9 rested near the station's outer hull, where narrow observation windows revealed nothing except distant stars and the blue glow of the planet below. The air smelled faintly of recycled oxygen, cold steel, and electrical insulation warmed by machinery that had operated without interruption for nearly 2 centuries. Amber maintenance lights reflected across spotless floors, leaving long shadows beneath reinforced doors designed to withstand pressure, temperature, and panic alike. In the center holding chamber, Marcus Hale sat quietly with both wrists secured inside magnetic restraint cuffs connected to the floor by a single gravitic chain. His black utility jacket had been replaced with a plain gray prison uniform that carried no rank, no insignia, and no history. A faint scrape marked one side of his face, but his expression remained calm. His pale gray eyes wandered slowly across the ceiling instead of toward the guards watching him through the transparent security barrier. He counted ventilation grills. He measured the delay between cooling cycles. He noticed one overhead light flickering exactly every 18 seconds. He never appeared interested. That was exactly why he saw everything. Beyond the reinforced glass, several alien guards observed him with relaxed amusement. Their polished white armor reflected the corridor lighting, while sapphire blue skin contrasted sharply against bright metallic uniforms trimmed with silver. One younger guard folded her arms and laughed softly. "This is the famous human?" Another leaned closer to the viewing panel with obvious curiosity. "Our reports describe Deathworlders as unstoppable." The first guard smiled. "He cannot even stand without permission." Quiet laughter spread through the security station. Marcus never acknowledged it. He simply lowered his eyes toward the chain resting across the floor and listened, not to the voices, to the vibration beneath them. Somewhere deep inside the station, massive circulation pumps maintained atmospheric pressure through endless networks of ducts hidden behind the walls. One section carried an irregular pulse, too slow for an alarm, too steady to ignore. Heavy footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor. Every guard immediately straightened. Conversation disappeared as the station's chief warden entered without hurry. Warden Serapha Voss moved with effortless confidence earned through years of absolute authority. Her sapphire blue skin seemed almost luminous beneath the white corridor lights. Long silver hair rested neatly across the back of her ceremonial command uniform, while golden eyes surveyed the chamber with disciplined precision. She stopped before Marcus's cell and studied him in complete silence. Unlike the others, she did not smile. She preferred observation to assumptions. "Prisoner Marcus Hale," she said evenly. "Former military engineer. Human Colonial Defense Authority." Marcus looked up for the first time. "Former," he answered quietly. Serapha nodded once. "You understand this facility has never lost a prisoner." Marcus glanced toward the ceiling again before answering. "Facilities usually believe that until the day they do." A faint smile appeared among the younger guards, but only because they assumed the human was attempting humor. Serapha noticed something different. He had answered without fear, without arrogance, as though he were commenting on tomorrow's weather. She stepped closer to the transparent barrier. "You seem remarkably calm for someone wearing restraints." Marcus rested both hands comfortably upon the cold steel floor. "Chains tell you where a person cannot go." He lifted his eyes toward hers. "They tell you nothing about where a person is thinking." For the first time that morning, Serapha felt the smallest hesitation settle quietly behind her confidence. Before she could respond, a barely audible vibration traveled through the chamber floor. None of the younger guards reacted. Marcus did. His eyes shifted almost imperceptibly toward the nearest ventilation grill, and in that silent moment, he realized the prison was already beginning to fail long before anyone else had noticed. Marcus Hale remained seated after the guards walked away. Their laughter gradually disappeared beneath the steady mechanical rhythm of the prison, leaving only the distant hum of circulation systems and the quiet clicking of magnetic locks changing shifts throughout cell block 9. He lowered his eyes toward the gravitic chain resting across the polished steel floor and listened again. The vibration returned exactly 31 seconds later. Slightly stronger, slightly longer. It was not random. Machines almost never failed without speaking first. Most people simply never learned how to hear them. Above the corridor ceiling, countless ventilation ducts carried warm air through the station with mathematical precision. Every few minutes the flow adjusted to compensate for pressure changes between occupied sectors. This time one adjustment arrived almost half a second late. Marcus closed his eyes. Somewhere beyond the walls, an aging circulation pump was working harder than it should. Somewhere else, backup regulators had already begun compensating for a problem that no alarm considered serious enough to announce. Yet, footsteps echoed across the corridor once more. Warden Serapha Voss returned without the younger guards following behind. She carried a slim electronic tablet beneath one arm, while the polished silver trim of her command uniform reflected the pale overhead lighting. She stopped outside the transparent barrier and quietly observed the prisoner, who seemed strangely interested in ceilings, walls, and silence instead of escape. "You have been studying this room since you arrived," she said. Marcus opened his eyes. Everyone studies something. Most prisoners study the locks. Locks are honest. Her expression shifted with quiet curiosity. Honest. Marcus nodded slightly. They only do one job. Walls are the ones that hide secrets. Serapha looked around the chamber before returning her attention to him. "You continue speaking as though you designed this facility." "No," Marcus glanced toward a ventilation grill near the upper corner of the room. "But someone very much like me did." She followed his gaze. "An engineer." "A tired engineer," Marcus answered softly. "Probably working against impossible deadlines. Probably told to reduce maintenance costs without changing performance targets." Serapha looked back toward him with visible skepticism. "You concluded all of that from an air vent?" "From the sound behind it." Silence settled comfortably between them. The station continued breathing through its endless network of machinery, while distant maintenance drones traveled unseen inside narrow service corridors hidden throughout the orbital structure. Finally, Serapha asked, "Before the war, what exactly did you build?" Marcus rested his hands upon the cool floor. "Emergency shelters. Life support systems. Evacuation tunnels. Places people hoped they would never need. Not weapons." He smiled faintly. "Someone has to make sure civilians survive after the people with weapons finish making mistakes." For the first time, Serapha found herself reconsidering the intelligence files she had reviewed before his arrival. They described Marcus Hale as a logistics specialist attached to military engineering divisions. Efficient, quiet, resourceful. None mentioned the calm certainty with which he observed the world around him. None explained why speaking with him felt less like questioning a prisoner and more like listening to someone who had already solved a problem no one else had noticed. A soft notification sounded from her wrist communicator. "Routine maintenance inspection postponed. Reactor stabilization sequence delayed by 12 minutes." She dismissed the message without concern. Marcus did not. His eyes lifted briefly toward the ceiling before returning to the floor. "Your maintenance schedule changed," he said. Serapha looked surprised. "How could you possibly know that?" The vibration stopped. She instinctively checked her communicator again. "You heard that?" "No." Marcus looked toward the nearest wall where another almost imperceptible tremor passed through the steel framework. "I heard what did not happen." Before Serapha could ask another question, a faint sound drifted from somewhere beyond the neighboring cell. It was not an alarm. It was a quiet cough followed by uneven breathing, soft enough that most people would never notice beneath the constant hum of the prison. Marcus turned his head immediately. His expression changed for the first time since entering the station. Not fear, concern. The uneven breathing continued for several seconds before fading beneath the familiar hum of circulation fans. Marcus Hale remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the narrow ventilation grill separating his holding chamber from the neighboring cell. The sound returned again, weaker this time, followed by the faint metallic rattle of someone trying to remain quiet. Warden Serapha Voss noticed his attention immediately. "What is it?" she asked. Marcus did not answer right away. He listened once more before speaking. "Someone next door is not getting enough air." Serapha glanced toward the security display mounted beside the transparent barrier. A quick review showed every environmental indicator operating well within acceptable limits. Oxygen levels remained stable. Temperature remained constant. Atmospheric pressure showed no abnormalities. The system reports everything is normal, she replied. Marcus gave a slight nod. The system is measuring the corridor. He looked toward the ceiling, not the blocked secondary intake behind that wall. Serapha frowned. There is no blockage. Marcus calmly asked, when was the last manual inspection? She hesitated for only a moment. 5 months ago. Designed for every 3 months? She did not answer. She did not have to. Marcus already understood. Budget reductions. Extended maintenance cycles. Small compromises repeated often enough eventually became invisible. The prison had not failed overnight. It had been quietly learning how to fail for years. Serapha activated a maintenance channel through her wrist communicator. Control, verify environmental conditions in cell block 9, sector 4. A calm voice answered almost immediately. All readings remain within operational standards, Warden. Marcus slowly shook his head. Asked them to send someone. The officer's expression remained composed. There is no indication requiring physical inspection. Before Serapha could respond, another soft cough echoed through the neighboring wall. This time she heard it herself. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of strained breathing from someone trying not to panic. Her golden eyes narrowed. Dispatch a maintenance technician immediately, she ordered. Now. The communication channel closed without argument. Silence returned once more, broken only by the steady rhythm of machinery hidden deep inside the station. Marcus relaxed against the cold wall behind him. Thank you, he said quietly. Serapha folded her arms. You are concerned about another prisoner. Yes. You do not know who occupies that cell. No. The prisoner could belong to a civilization that fought against yours. Marcus looked toward the faint blue glow drifting through the observation window, overlooking distant stars. Breathing problems usually ignore political alliances. The words settled heavily between them. Serapha had supervised thousands of inmates during her career. She had witnessed desperation, manipulation, anger, and fear. She had rarely witnessed genuine concern offered without expectation of reward. Several minutes later, the corridor door opened and a maintenance technician hurried inside, carrying a portable diagnostic unit. After scanning the environmental junction concealed behind the neighboring wall, the technician's posture changed immediately. Restricted airflow, he reported. A particulate filter inside the secondary intake has partially collapsed. The automatic sensors never detected the reduction because the primary corridor intake compensated for the pressure loss. Serapha remained silent while the technician replaced the damaged filter. Less than a minute later, the uneven breathing beyond the wall gradually settled into a calm, steady rhythm. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, listening until he was certain the stranger could breathe comfortably again. He never asked who occupied the neighboring cell. He never requested thanks. He simply returned to studying the quiet rhythm of the prison. As the technician packed away the damaged filter, he looked curiously toward the restrained human. How did you know? Marcus opened his eyes with the faintest hint of a tired smile. Buildings speak long before they collapse. The technician left without another word. Serapha remained standing outside the transparent barrier, her confidence no longer untouched. She had spent years believing absolute control came from stronger locks, thicker walls, and stricter discipline. Yet a prisoner wearing chains had noticed a failing system before an entire station filled with sophisticated technology. For the first time since Marcus Hale arrived aboard the prison, the warden found herself wondering whether the most dangerous human in the facility was dangerous precisely because he kept choosing to save lives instead of taking advantage of weaknesses. The maintenance technician disappeared down the corridor, and the heavy security door sealed behind him with a quiet magnetic click that echoed through cell block 9. Silence returned once again, but it no longer felt ordinary. Warden Serapha Voss remained standing outside the transparent barrier, her golden eyes resting on Marcus Hale instead of the security displays surrounding them. Around them, the prison continued operating with flawless discipline on the surface. Gravity locks cycled. Service drones floated silently through polished hallways. White corridor lights reflected across steel walls untouched by dust or disorder. Yet beneath that perfect appearance, Serapha now sensed something she had never considered before. A system could look flawless while quietly drifting toward failure. Marcus sat exactly where he had been since arriving, his magnetic restraints still securing both wrists to the floor. He did not test the chain. He did not inspect the lock. Instead, he watched a narrow beam of warm air rising from the repaired ventilation grill. The airflow had become smooth again. Whatever prisoner occupied the neighboring cell could finally breathe without struggling. That seemed enough for him. Serapha broke the silence. You could have remained quiet. Marcus lifted his eyes. Yes. No one would have blamed you. Probably not. She studied his expression carefully. You helped someone who may never know your name. Marcus gave a faint smile. Most people who built shelters never met the families sleeping inside them either. The answer lingered in the quiet room. Before Serapha could respond, another notification appeared across her wrist communicator. Routine inspection requested in Reactor Distribution Sector 3. Minor thermal fluctuation. She glanced at the report only briefly before dismissing it. Marcus noticed the movement immediately. Another maintenance delay? She looked back at him with visible surprise. How did you know it concerned maintenance? Your shoulders became tense instead of defensive. He glanced toward the ceiling where distant machinery continued humming with patient consistency. People react differently when problems come from inside their own systems. Serapha folded her arms. You analyze people the same way you analyze buildings. They are not as different as most believe. She allowed herself the smallest hint of curiosity. Explain. Marcus looked toward the transparent observation window where the frozen blue planet slowly rotated beneath the station. Strong foundations rarely demand attention. It is the neglected places that eventually decide whether everything above survives. Another gentle vibration rolled beneath the floor, stronger than before. This time Serapha felt it immediately. She looked toward the nearest wall panel where a tiny maintenance light flickered once before returning to green. There, Marcus said quietly. Did you feel that? She nodded. What does it mean? Nothing yet. He paused for a moment. That is usually how larger problems begin. Serapha activated a private engineering channel. Status report on Reactor Distribution Sector 3. The reply arrived after several seconds. Minor heat imbalance detected. Automatic regulation remains within acceptable parameters. No action required. Marcus listened without interrupting. When the transmission ended, he quietly asked, Did they mention the source? No, because they do not know it yet. Serapha looked at him carefully. You sound very certain. Marcus rested one hand lightly against the cool steel floor. Heat leaves clues. Pressure leaves patterns. Machines never hide what they are feeling. They simply assume no one is listening. Somewhere beyond the walls, a faint metallic sound echoed through hidden service tunnels before disappearing into the endless structure of the station. It lasted less than a second. Marcus heard it. Serapha heard nothing. He closed his eyes, tracing the sound in his mind like someone remembering an old blueprint. When he finally opened them again, calm concern had replaced quiet observation. Your prison is trying very hard to warn you, he said softly. The question is whether anyone will believe it before it stops asking. Outside the reinforced chamber, young guards continued laughing with one another, confident that another uneventful shift would soon end. None of them noticed the almost invisible trail of pale gray dust drifting from a ventilation seam high above the corridor, or the faint scent of overheated metal beginning to mingle with the otherwise sterile air of the station. The faint scent of overheated metal lingered in the corridor long after Warden Serapha Voss dismissed the engineering report. Most officers would never have noticed it. Sterile air recyclers quickly diluted unfamiliar odors until they blended into the prison's carefully regulated atmosphere. Marcus Hale noticed anyway. He slowly inhaled once before looking toward the upper ventilation ducts where a nearly invisible ribbon of pale gray dust drifted through the warm airflow. It disappeared almost immediately beneath the intake grills, but it had already told him enough. Somewhere inside the station, insulation surrounding a primary energy conduit had begun breaking apart under temperatures it was never meant to endure. He rested quietly against the reinforced wall while the gravitic chain remained motionless beside him. Outside the transparent security barrier, younger guards resumed their casual conversations, their earlier confidence returning after the successful ventilation repair. One of them laughed while describing the human prisoner's strange habit of staring at walls instead of people. Another joked that perhaps Earth engineers communicated with buildings instead of friends. Their voices carried lightly through the corridor before fading beneath the steady hum of machinery. Marcus did not react. He had learned years ago that mockery often disappeared long before consequences did. A service drone floated past the holding chamber, carrying replacement filtration cartridges toward another maintenance sector. Halfway through the corridor, it paused unexpectedly, rotated several degrees, then recalculated its route before continuing forward. The interruption lasted barely 2 seconds. Marcus watched every movement. "Even the drones are compensating now," he said quietly. Serapha looked toward the departing machine. "Compensating for what?" "Traffic." She frowned. "There are thousands of service drones aboard this station." "Exactly." Marcus lowered his voice. "They only change routes when hidden maintenance corridors become unavailable." Serapha immediately opened another engineering channel. "Control, explain the temporary drone rerouting in cell block 9. The reply came back after a brief pause. "Routine optimization, Warden. No operational concern detected." Marcus smiled faintly. That answer arrived too slowly. Serapha glanced toward him. "You measured the delay." Someone checked before answering. The warden remained silent. She had supervised enough officers to recognize the subtle hesitation hidden inside perfectly professional voices. People delayed responses when they needed confirmation. Confirmation meant uncertainty. Uncertainty meant the problem already existed. Before either of them spoke again, a soft chime echoed through the corridor as meal distribution began. Automated carts rolled silently between reinforced doors, delivering identical nutrition containers into each holding cell through secure transfer ports. Marcus accepted his tray without comment. He placed the sealed container aside untouched before carefully lifting the cup of water resting beside it. He held the cup perfectly still beneath the corridor lighting. Tiny ripples crossed the surface every few seconds. Regular, predictable, growing slightly stronger with each passing cycle. Serapha watched him curiously. "You are measuring vibration through water." Marcus nodded. "Old field habit." "Does it work?" "Water notices movement before instruments sometimes do." She stepped closer to the transparent barrier and looked at the nearly invisible ripples. "What are they telling you?" Marcus waited through another cycle before answering. "The heat imbalance is spreading farther than engineering believes." The warden looked toward her communicator once more, but before she could contact central control, the corridor lights dimmed for less than a heartbeat before returning to normal brightness. Several younger guards looked around in mild confusion. One shrugged and continued eating. Another dismissed it as an ordinary power adjustment. Marcus quietly closed his eyes. "That should not happen," he said. Serapha looked directly at him. "Power fluctuations occur occasionally. Not in a prison designed with triple redundancy." His calm voice carried no fear, only certainty. One backup accepted a load it was never scheduled to carry. The words settled heavily inside the chamber. At that exact moment, another maintenance notification appeared across Serapha's communicator. "Reactor distribution sector 3. Thermal fluctuation increasing. Additional diagnostics recommended." She stared at the message longer than before. When she finally looked back toward Marcus, the distance between prisoner and warden felt strangely smaller. She no longer saw only a restrained human sitting on a steel floor. She saw someone quietly reading the invisible language of a station that everyone else still believed was perfectly safe, while deep inside the endless structure, ancient machines continued whispering warnings that were becoming harder to ignore with every passing minute. The latest maintenance alert remained illuminated on Warden Serapha Voss's wrist communicator long after she finished reading it. She dismissed the notification, but not the uneasiness that came with it. Around her, Cell Block 9 continued following its ordinary routine. Security drones floated through polished corridors with silent precision. Gravity locks cycled exactly on schedule. Automated announcements echoed softly through hidden speakers, reminding officers that every system aboard the station remained fully operational. The words sounded reassuring. The machinery beneath them did not. Marcus Hale slowly set the untouched meal tray aside and leaned back against the reinforced wall. The ripples inside his cup of water had become more frequent. Small circles crossed the surface every few seconds before disappearing again, each one carrying a message only someone trained to recognize structural behavior would understand. He watched quietly until another vibration passed beneath the floor. Slightly stronger, slightly deeper. "The load has moved," he said. Serapha immediately looked toward him. "Moved where?" Marcus pointed toward the ceiling without lifting his restrained hands very far. "Away from the primary reactor. Into the emergency distribution grid." She frowned. "The emergency grid only activates during major failures, or when engineers are trying to prevent one." Serapha opened a direct communication line to Central Engineering. "Status report." A calm voice answered almost instantly. "Preventive power balancing is underway. All systems remain secure." Marcus listened without interrupting. When the transmission ended, he quietly asked, "Did they tell you why preventive balancing became necessary?" Serapha remained silent. They had not. Before either of them spoke again, another sound drifted through the ventilation system. It was not mechanical. It was a child's quiet laugh, followed by soft conversation in an unfamiliar alien language. Marcus looked toward the narrow air vent separating the detention block from another section of the station. "Families," he said softly. Serapha nodded once. "Civilian processing quarters are directly below this level." Marcus remained quiet for several moments. "How many?" "Approximately 200. Visitors? Some. Others are awaiting relocation after regional disputes." Marcus lowered his eyes toward the floor. "Then whatever happens here cannot be allowed to reach that level." Serapha studied him carefully. "You are thinking about civilians again." He answered without hesitation. "Someone should." The warden found herself looking through the observation window instead of at the prisoner. Beyond the thick, transparent panels, the frozen world below reflected pale blue sunlight across endless fields of ice. She had served aboard orbital stations for nearly 15 years. Every protocol, every regulation, every inspection existed to preserve order. Yet standing beside a restrained human, she realized that order and safety were not always the same thing. Sometimes systems protected themselves first, people second. A sudden chime interrupted her thoughts. One of the younger guards hurried toward her carrying a portable diagnostic scanner. "Warden," the officer said, "Engineering has requested temporary access to the maintenance corridor behind this detention wing." They detected irregular heat signatures inside the conduit network. Marcus quietly closed his eyes. "Too late," he whispered almost to himself. Serapha heard him. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the wall where another faint stream of warm air escaped through the ventilation grill. The smell of overheated insulation had become easier to notice now, mixing with the otherwise sterile atmosphere. "Heat is never the beginning," Marcus said calmly. "It is the evidence that the beginning has already passed." The young guard looked uncertain. "Engineering believes they can isolate the affected section within the hour." Marcus slowly shook his head. "If they are still talking about isolation, then they have not found the source." Silence settled across the corridor. Even the younger officer stopped speaking. Somewhere deep inside the immense prison, a distant metallic groan rolled through unseen support structures before fading into the endless maze of reinforced walls. It sounded almost like the station itself had released a long, tired breath after carrying too much weight for too many years. Marcus listened until the echo disappeared. Then he lifted his eyes towards Serapha with the same calm expression he had worn since arriving in chains. "When buildings begin whispering that loudly," he said, "they are no longer asking for repairs. They are asking for time. And I do not think this prison has very much left." "Sua," the metallic groan faded into silence, but the silence itself felt different now. It carried tension instead of stability, as though the immense prison had begun holding its breath. Warden Serapha Voss stood motionless beside the transparent security barrier, replaying Marcus Hale's words in her mind, while fresh engineering reports accumulated across her wrist communicator. Every report used the same reassuring language. Localized fluctuation, preventive balancing, stable containment. None explained why more maintenance teams were suddenly moving through restricted service corridors, or why emergency power continued shifting between independent grids that had remained untouched for years. Marcus watched another faint ripple spread across the surface of his untouched cup of water before it disappeared. "They are chasing symptoms," he said quietly. Serapha looked toward him. Engineering believes the situation is under control. Marcus nodded once. Good engineers usually do, until they discover they have been solving the wrong problem. Before she could answer, every light inside cell block 9 dimmed slightly for 2 seconds before returning to full brightness. The interruption was brief enough that several younger guards laughed nervously and continued their conversations. One blamed an old relay. Another joked that the station simply needed more coffee. Marcus did not smile. He listened. Somewhere far below, hidden beneath layers of reinforced decks, the deep vibration he had followed since his arrival changed rhythm again. Not stronger. Faster. The regulators are cycling too often, he whispered. At that exact moment, a priority transmission reached Serapha's communicator. Her expression changed as she read it. Marcus noticed immediately. What happened? She hesitated before answering. Command has ordered a precautionary security lockdown across 3 detention sectors. Marcus slowly raised his eyes. Including this one? Yes. Why? Engineering requested unrestricted access to the lower conduit network. Marcus remained silent for several seconds. Then he quietly asked, did they evacuate the civilian processing level? Serapha checked the report again. No. The order only affects detention areas. Marcus lowered his head. Then they still do not understand where this is going. The corridor doors sealed with a heavy magnetic sound as crimson security indicators illuminated along the ceiling. Thick reinforced barriers descended across maintenance intersections one by one, isolating entire sections of the station exactly as protocol demanded. To every officer aboard, the response appeared organized and efficient. To Marcus, it looked frighteningly familiar. He had seen emergency procedures like this before on damaged colonies during his years designing evacuation shelters. Systems built to contain danger often became traps when they misunderstood its direction. Soft voices drifted upward through the ventilation ducts once again. Children laughing. Parents talking quietly. Someone began humming a gentle melody in a language Marcus could not understand. He closed his eyes briefly. They are still there, he said. Serapha followed his gaze toward the vent. Yes. How long would it take to move them? Perhaps 20 minutes. Marcus looked back at her. You do not have 20. For the first time since assuming command of the prison years earlier, Serapha felt uncertainty replace procedure. She activated a direct command channel unavailable to ordinary officers. Central Control, I recommend immediate relocation of all civilians from the lower processing level. A brief silence followed before an older voice answered calmly. Recommendation denied. Current conditions do not justify unnecessary movement. Serapha's jaw tightened. Engineering reports continue escalating. Containment protocols remain effective. Warden, maintain lockdown until further notice. The transmission ended. Marcus never asked what they had said. He already knew. Institutions rarely abandoned protocol before evidence became impossible to ignore. Unfortunately, evidence often arrived later than consequences. Another deep vibration rolled beneath the floor, lasting longer than any before it. This time, even the younger guards stopped talking. A fine line appeared across one ceiling panel before disappearing beneath shifting light. Dust drifted softly through the beam above Marcus's cell. He looked up without fear, only quiet resolve. If they lock every door, he said, his voice almost lost beneath the endless hum of the station, they will not be sealing danger inside. They will be sealing innocent people away from the only paths that can still save them. The fine stream of dust drifting from the ceiling settled slowly onto the polished steel floor, almost beautiful beneath the white corridor lights. No alarm acknowledged it. No warning indicator changed color. The prison continued pretending that everything remained exactly as it had been only minutes before. Marcus Hale watched another small ripple cross the untouched cup of water resting beside him. This time the movement did not disappear immediately. The surface continued trembling with tiny overlapping circles that refused to become still. He quietly looked toward Warden Serapha Voss. The balance is gone, he said. She did not ask what he meant. She already understood enough to know his observations had never been random. Another priority report arrived across her communicator before she could respond. Thermal fluctuations had expanded beyond Reactor Distribution Sector 3. Additional maintenance teams had been redirected. Several access tunnels had automatically sealed after pressure differences exceeded normal operating limits. The report still classified the situation as manageable. Marcus slowly shook his head. They are losing the map. Serapha looked at him. Explain. Every new report is about a different location. He glanced toward the ceiling where warm air continued flowing through hidden ducts. When failures appear everywhere at once, the real problem is somewhere no one is looking. Before she could reply, a deep tone echoed softly throughout the detention block. Not an emergency alarm, an internal routing signal. Marcus listened carefully until it faded. That was not for security, he said. No, Serapha checked another display. Engineering has opened emergency bypass channels. Marcus looked toward the reinforced corridor door where thick magnetic seals still held every section isolated. Then they have accepted they cannot stop it. The younger guards exchanged uncertain glances. Their earlier confidence had quietly disappeared. One officer approached the warden. Command has instructed all personnel to remain at assigned posts until engineering completes stabilization. Serapha acknowledged the order without speaking. Marcus watched the guard leave before quietly asking, "Do your officers know what is below the civilian processing level?" She answered after a brief pause. Old service conduits. Storage. Cooling systems. Evacuation corridors. Marcus corrected gently. Every large station has them, hidden beneath ordinary maintenance routes. Serapha frowned. Those passages were sealed decades ago. On paper, Marcus's calm voice never changed. Engineers almost never remove emergency paths. They hide them because they hope no one will ever need them. Another subtle vibration rolled beneath the chamber. This time, a narrow maintenance panel several yards away shifted slightly before settling back into place. One of the younger guards stepped toward it in confusion. Marcus's eyes followed the movement. "There," he whispered. "The pressure is changing behind that wall." Serapha walked to the panel and rested one hand against the cool metal. Even through her gloves, she could feel a faint warmth that should not have been there. She immediately contacted engineering again. Confirm thermal readings behind maintenance junction 42. Several long seconds passed before anyone answered. "Warden, we are unable to access current data from that junction." "Why?" "The sensors stopped responding approximately 4 minutes ago." Marcus quietly closed his eyes. "Not stopped," he said. "Disconnected." Serapha looked back toward him. "How can you be certain?" He opened his eyes and met her gaze with steady calm. "Because if the sensors had failed, the system would report an error." He nodded toward her communicator. Instead, it reported nothing. The realization settled over her like the cold light filling the corridor. Somewhere inside the station, an entire section had become invisible to the very systems designed to protect it. She turned toward the nearest security officer. "Bring me the original construction archives for this detention ring. Not the updated maintenance files. The first ones." The officer looked surprised. "Those records are more than 100 years old." "Exactly." As the guard hurried away, Marcus shifted the gravitic chain slightly across the floor. Not to escape, only to sit closer to the wall where the faint warmth continued spreading through hidden conduits. He listened carefully until he found the rhythm he had been searching for since arriving aboard the prison. Then he spoke with quiet certainty. "The old evacuation corridors are still there. If the civilian level is going to survive, those forgotten paths will matter far more than every locked door in this station." The original construction archives arrived less than 3 minutes later. Dust-covered engineering diagrams, scanned from records older than most officers aboard the station, unfolded across the command display beside Warden Serapha Voss. Unlike the polished digital maps used every day, these drawings were filled with handwritten revisions, forgotten maintenance notes, and emergency routes that no longer appeared in modern navigation systems. Marcus Hale studied the projection from inside his cell without moving. His gray eyes traveled slowly across intersecting service tunnels until they stopped near the civilian processing level. "There," he said quietly. "The original evacuation corridor." Serapha enlarged the section. A narrow passage extended beneath the detention ring before connecting to an independent docking platform that no current database recognized. "Engineering removed this route decades ago," one young officer insisted. Marcus gently shook his head. "They removed it from the software, not from the station." At that moment, another deep vibration rolled beneath the floor, followed by the soft sound of automatic ventilation slowing throughout the detention block. The overhead lights dimmed briefly before emergency illumination replaced the bright white glow with calm amber lighting. This time no one laughed. Every officer in the corridor looked toward the ceiling as the station's calm mechanical rhythm changed into something slower and heavier. Serapha opened a direct channel to Central Command one final time. Authorized civilian evacuation through the original emergency corridor immediately. A long silence followed before the answer returned. Construction records confirm the passage still exists. Emergency teams are moving now. She closed the channel and looked toward Marcus. You were right. Marcus offered the smallest of smiles. The engineers who built this place expected someone would eventually forget why they added those corridors. Minutes passed. Through the ventilation ducts came new sounds replacing quiet conversations from earlier. Calm instructions. Steady footsteps. Children asking simple questions. Adults reassuring one another. No panic filled the station. Only movement. Somewhere beneath the detention ring, forgotten doors that had remained sealed for generations opened once again for the purpose they had always been meant to serve. Rescue craft gradually arrived at the hidden docking platform, while engineering teams carefully redirected power away from aging structural systems. Cell Block 9 remained locked, but the atmosphere had completely changed. No one watched Marcus as though he were simply another prisoner anymore. They watched him the way sailors might watch the only person who still recognized the stars after every instrument had failed. Several hours later, the orbital station had been fully evacuated. The oldest sections were permanently decommissioned after inspectors confirmed widespread structural fatigue throughout the hidden infrastructure. From the observation windows of the rescue vessels, the abandoned prison drifted silently above the frozen planet, its lights gradually fading one section at a time until only a dark silhouette remained against the distant stars. Fine clouds of frost and metallic debris slowly surrounded the empty structure as maintenance drones carefully dismantled unstable sections. To many observers, it looked as though the prison had quietly turned into drifting ash beneath the endless night. Warden Serapha Voss stood beside Marcus aboard the evacuation transport. His magnetic restraints had finally been removed, yet he made no attempt to leave before everyone else had boarded safely. She held the old construction archive in her hands and looked toward the silent station one last time. I believed strength meant building walls no one could cross, she said softly. Marcus watched the abandoned prison disappear into darkness. Strong walls matter, he answered. But the people who remember where the doors are matter even more. Neither of them spoke again as the rescue vessel turned toward open space. Behind them, the forgotten prison vanished slowly into the cold distance, carrying with it every illusion of perfect control. Long afterward, officers who survived that day remembered many things about the quiet human engineer. They remembered that he never broke his chains. He never threatened his captors. He never tried to prove anyone wrong. Instead, he listened when the station whispered that it was failing, and because one ordinary human chose to hear what everyone else ignored, countless strangers walked away beneath living skies instead of becoming part of a forgotten ruin. Sometimes the greatest escape is not leaving a prison. It is making sure everyone else can.